Good evening to everyone. I would like to share this story without revealing my name as I still fear for my safety. You see, this happened to me a few years ago in the United States when I was hired to watch a building at night. It was a small 5-story building owned by a millionaire who rented it out as offices. The man would occasionally visit the place but was almost never seen. My duty was to guard the place at night, stay at the reception, monitor the cameras, and report any issues. However, when I was hired, I was told to never go to the 5th floor since it was out of service. Only the owner could enter there. So, I obeyed. But one night while I was at reception playing with my cell phone, the night was very quiet. Later, I decided to take a walk through the offices, my routine rounds, just to see that everything was in order. I was on the 4th floor when I heard thumping coming from the last floor, which I was forbidden to enter. I didn't know if I should go up to check, but then the thumping grew louder. Without a second thought, for the first time, I went up to the last floor. Upon arrival, there was a very long hallway, but at the end, there was a door from where the thumping was coming. I approached slowly, and upon reaching, I tried to open the door, but it was locked. I couldn't open it, obviously, because I hadn't been given keys to the top floor. Additionally, there was something very strange I noticed. The door had a double lock on the outside. At that moment, I received a call on my radio from the building manager, who scolded me for being on the 5th floor. I asked him how he knew that, and he said the owner had called him very angrily because he was watching me through the cameras. The person spied on the place at night. I apologized to the manager and mentioned what I had heard, and that was why I went up to check. He replied very angrily, telling me to get out of there if I didn't want to get into trouble, that there was a reason he had warned me to never go to that floor. I apologized and went back to my post. I was very confused and worried about being fired, but I couldn't stop thinking about what those thumps were for the door, nor why no one could go up there. I didn't trust the situation anymore, but I didn't ask questions. About 3 days passed and I was working in the building again, checking floor by floor, when I heard those insistent thumps on the top part again. I tried to ignore them, but it was impossible. I made the most difficult decision of my life. I went up again to check that 5th floor and find out once and for all what or who was causing those thumps. So, I ventured to the 5th floor again. The thumps got louder as I approached that last door. I knocked twice and asked, "Is anyone there?" Then they started to knock with more force and more desperately those thumps. I said, "If you're making the noise, knock twice if you need help." And so, they responded with 2 thumps. I was too scared because I knew I had to act quickly before the owner saw me through the cameras again. So, I quickly went down to the reception where I had a hammer, returned, and started to hit the lock with all my might. I also broke that padlock on the outside of the door. When I finally could open the door, I was totally paralyzed. Inside, the first thing I saw was a man lying on the floor, bound hand and foot with tape over his mouth. He was the one causing the thumps with his feet. But that was not the worst part. There were bodies of people in display cases as if they were mannequins, and there was a giant freezer where he had more human remains. I didn't react instantly. It's one of those moments in life where you can't move from the shock. After reacting, I started to untie the person, removed the tape from his mouth, and he desperately asked me to help him, to get him out of there as soon as possible. I asked him who had done this to him, how he had gotten into this situation. He mentioned the name of the owner, which of course I will omit in this story. He wanted to do business with him, but something had gone wrong, and he had deprived him of his freedom, to later take him to that room where he was waiting to do what the person usually did with his victims: experiment on their bodies. He was a complete psychopath. I couldn't believe it. I wanted to call the police, but I had left my cell phone at the reception. I only had my radio, but there I could only communicate with the manager, whom I no longer knew if I could trust. When I finally managed to untie the man, I told him we had to run, but he was very injured and could hardly walk. We were halfway down the hallway when all the lights in the building went out, I knew something was wrong. We couldn't take the elevator, so we had to go down the stairs by force. The man told me we had to hide. He was sure it was him who had caused the blackout. I told him there was nowhere to hide on that floor since all the rooms were locked. We had to go down to at least the 4th floor via the stairs. It was all dark. Only what my flashlight touched was visible. And as we were going down, we heard someone from below open the door to enter the stairs. I was beside myself with fear. The man wouldn't stop crying. We were paralyzed when we heard someone start to climb the steps. Suddenly, that person, the owner, told us, "There's nowhere to go." I managed to get the man out and we ran back to that macabre room. I closed the door and put a table to block it. We had no way out. I took the hammer to defend myself since I had no other weapon. The person started to hit the door, and I pushed the table with all my might so that he couldn't open it. But my effort was in vain. The guy managed to get in and went for me, putting his big hands around my neck, about to end my life. But the man took the hammer and hit him on the head. The guy fell unconscious. Then, we quickly went down, and I grabbed my cell phone and called emergencies. They arrived immediately and cordoned off the place since it was a crime scene. There, they found that room with all those remains. All those people were victims of that person, who is now in a maximum security prison. That was a nightmare. I still fear for my life. Sometimes I dream that the guy escapes from prison and comes for me. The place was demolished and I think it's now abandoned. I moved to another city and keep trying to get over it, which, to be honest, will haunt me for the rest of my life. Hello everyone, my name is Herman. I am Mexican, but I have been living in Spain for over 20 years. Among my first jobs was working as a security guard at a hacienda located on the outskirts of Madrid, in the middle of the highway. I was responsible for guarding the place at night. It's a very large hacienda, covering several hectares of land. This hacienda was used by wealthy people who rented it for their social events. However, it is a very old place with a lot of history, but somewhat dark history because many years ago it was a temple of the Holy Inquisition, where thousands of people were tortured and of course deprived of their lives. So, you can imagine all the paranormal stories that exist about this place. I was unaware of all this when I started working there as a night watchman. So, these are some of the experiences I had at that place. One night, I was in the entrance booth when suddenly I saw someone walking through the hacienda's courtyard. It was very dim as almost everything was dark. I immediately went out to check and saw that the shadow entered a building that is abandoned within the hacienda. Nobody uses that place. It went up the open stairs and entered the upper part. I followed what I thought was a person, yelling, "Please get out of there, you can't be here." As I got closer, I could see a monk standing on those abandoned stairs, but it seemed like he had no face because nothing was visible under his cloak. I dropped my flashlight from the fright. The man continued up the stairs without saying a word to me. Of course, I didn't want to follow him. I withdrew from the place and started walking through the courtyard to get back to the booth. I decided to look back at that construction, and I swear I saw that man hanging from the 2nd floor as if he had taken his own life. I started to run faster because I knew it was not human. I looked back again when I was about to reach the booth, but there was nothing there anymore. I was very scared, so I called my wife on the phone. I needed to talk to someone and vent. I'm not sure my wife believed me, but she did calm me down a lot. After that event, everything started to get worse. The following nights I worked there, I heard things. Screams coming from the back of the hacienda, cries and moans of pain. The first few times I did check and it was never anything, but after that I stopped going. I just let it be because it was obvious that it was not living people. Also, one night while I was doing a round of surveillance, I saw a woman dressed in black on the upper part of that abandoned construction. She walked through the entire ground floor, showing herself through the windows. I had a lot of respect for all that. I knew they were troubled souls wandering around the place. As I already told you, it has a lot of history of horrific things that happened there. When I saw or heard things, I would just retreat and lock myself in the booth and pray for those souls. I swear that if cell phones with cameras had existed at that time, I would be famous for all the paranormal things I could have recorded there. And I was not the only one who had experienced things. One of the janitors of the place, who had been working there for more years, told me that even people who went to events at that place had experienced paranormal things. For example, he told me that one day during a wedding at the place, some girls came out very scared from the bathroom. They told the man that someone was screaming very ugly in one of the bathrooms, crying a lot, but it was not any of the guests. When they looked under the door, they saw that the person was wearing a black robe and very old sandals. They asked if she was okay, but she didn't respond, so they went to ask for help from the janitor. When the man went in to check, there was no one there in any bathroom. Everything remained a mystery. He also told me about another event where a child got lost in the hacienda. When his parents realized the little one was nowhere to be found, they panicked, and all the guests and staff started looking for him. Suddenly, the child was coming down the stairs of the abandoned construction, as if nothing had happened. When his mom asked him what he was doing up there, the child said that a man with a cloak had called him, and they were playing with a rope on the top. When the employees went up to check who it was, they found no one there. When he told me that anecdote, I immediately knew it was about that monk that had also appeared to me. These are just a few of the anecdotes that have happened in that place. But I'm sure that over the years, many more have happened and will continue to happen because the place hides terrifying stories, and those souls will be there forever. After a year, I left my job at that place, but I have many more anecdotes that I will tell you about later. My name is Paulo, and I spent a few months working as a security guard, or watchman as you might call it, for a shopping mall in my city. This happened in Puerto Vallarta some time ago. As I mentioned, I was tasked with guarding the mall at night. It's a closed space but quite large, featuring 2 floors and housing all sorts of stores. I remember the night I started working there. The day shift guard came by, and we chatted for a bit. However, during our conversation, he said something that left me pondering. He told me not to be alarmed if I heard voices coming from the 2nd floor and to simply ignore them. He had been on the night shift before and no one had warned him about this, leading to quite the fright on his part. I inquired about who they might be, and he answered that it was never anyone. That other colleagues had also heard screams and people talking upstairs, but upon checking, everything would be empty. After sharing this, he bid me farewell and wished me luck. Truthfully, I didn't believe him. I thought he was just trying to scare me because I was the new guy. So, I entered the small office located at the mall's entrance. There, I was supposed to keep an eye on the cameras and make rounds throughout the center during the night. Everything was dark, save for a few small lights on in parts of the building. It was 2 a.m. I was eating my dinner and still monitoring the cameras when suddenly, I heard screams from the upper floor just as the man had warned me. I opened the office door and went out with my flashlight to check. The closer I got, the louder the screams became. But the man had forgotten to mention that these would be terrifying wails, as if something horrendous was happening to these people. It's the best way I can describe those screams. I climbed the stairs and started walking through the 2nd floor, checking each store, each space, to make sure no one was there. The closer I got to the back right side of the floor, the louder the wails became, until I reached the last store. It was a department store which I prefer not to name, but it's well known here in Mexico. The screams were coming from there. I peered through the large glass windows into the store, scanning everything with my flashlight, but there was no one. I returned to my post downstairs since there was nothing that could be the source of the wails. The wails continued until 3 a.m, after which the night passed peacefully. I was somewhat confused but not easily frightened. I'm a fan of horror, just like you, and to be honest, I was somewhat excited to have experienced my first paranormal event. However, that excitement didn't last long because later that day, After leaving work in the afternoon, I went to eat with a friend and told her what had happened on my first day. When I mentioned which mall it was, she looked at me in surprise. I asked what was wrong, and she inquired if I was aware of the tragedy that had occurred there years ago. I said I didn't know, and she told me that about 10 years prior, where the department store now stands, there used to be an event hall. During a bachelorette party, there was a gas leak in the kitchen that went unnoticed until it exploded. The entire kitchen staff died, and many guests were severely injured, with some losing their lives, including the bride-to-be. The news had gone viral back then. The place remained vacant for over a year, with no one going to the mall because the area was cordoned off. 2 years later, the department store rented the space. I was deeply saddened by this fact and later searched the internet to read the full story. I knew nothing of it since I had only moved to that city 3 years prior, coming from Oaxaca. So, my excitement turned to fear and sadness, as it became clear that the screams heard every night were from all those people who tragically lost their lives there in the most horrific way imaginable. I continued working there for a few more months until I found a better job. Throughout my time there, the wails would begin at 2 a.m., and I would no longer leave my office. I preferred to lock myself in and play music loudly to avoid hearing the cries, which would last about an hour before ceasing and not being heard again for the rest of the night. I never saw anything strange in the place, apart from the wails. The man who had warned me about the screams later became my friend. He told me that during his time on the night shift, he also saw silhouettes inside that store, which would then vanish into thin air. He was friends with some store employees who told him that when they were about to close with only the staff left, they would see shopping carts moving on their own, and also heard someone talking inside the manager's office when he was no longer there. There's no doubt that all those souls are still trapped in that place. Thank you for listening to my story. See you soon. Good evening, community. My name is Martin. In the past, I was a night watchman at an elementary school in Ciudad Victoria, Tamaulipas. I'm now retired, and this is one of the many experiences I lived through. I used to guard the school at night and had only recently started. I always stayed in the schoolyard sitting on a bench, but when it was very cold, I was allowed to enter one of the ground floor classrooms for shelter. Part of my job was to make at least 2 rounds throughout the night. I remember that day I arrived at my job around 10 p.m. and did my first round through the school to make sure everything was in order. After finishing, I went down, and since it was very cold, I opened a classroom and stayed there sitting on a chair. I was falling asleep when I heard a desk move in the classroom above. It made a loud screeching noise, as if furniture was being moved. I immediately went out to check, thinking a vagrant might have entered through a window to escape the cold. However, when I got to the classroom, I opened the door and found no one there. I turned on the light for a better look, and one of the student desks was almost at the teacher's desk, which was very strange because when I did the first round, all the classrooms were very tidy. I put the desk back in its place and left. When I went downstairs, I was about to enter the classroom below where I was going to stay when I felt someone watching me from above. I looked up, and there she was, a woman, or so it seemed, watching me from the window of that classroom I had just left. She had short black hair. I couldn't see her face well, but she was very pale. I was inexperienced, but I knew my job was to get her out of there, so I went up almost running. But when I arrived, the woman was no longer there. I don't know if you are sensitive people and can feel when something in the environment isn't right, but that's how it felt at that moment. Bad energies, something that can't be explained with words. Something made me immediately leave that classroom. I ran downstairs again and locked myself in. It hadn't been 5 seconds since I sat down when again, desks were moved upstairs, but now as if being slammed. I remained silent. After those bangs, footsteps were heard on the upper floor like high heels. I didn't want to leave, but I knew that was my job, and that's what I was being paid for, so I gathered my courage and went out again. This time I climbed the stairs very slowly, asking if there was anyone there, but of course, there was no answer. I walked very slowly towards that classroom, the one at the corner. The door was open. Just as I was about to step into the classroom, something else slammed the door in my face. Startled, I jumped and peered through the window but saw no one there. I opened the door and turned on the light. The desks were moved, each one turned over. The place was a mess. I put them back one by one, walked towards the door, and turned off the light. But upon turning it off, I saw her perfectly. A woman sitting in the corner where the desk was. The same woman I had seen before, pale with short hair, wearing a long black dress with buttons up to the neck, watching me. I ran out as fast as I could and locked myself in the downstairs classroom again. I was trembling and sweating coldly. I was very scared. I just wanted to flee, to go home and never return, but I couldn't do that. So, I started to pray. Then, more bangs were heard from upstairs, followed by footsteps descending the stairs. Friends, I wouldn't wish that fear on anyone. I knew she was coming for me. The only thing I could do was continue praying, asking that whatever it was wouldn't harm me. I saw the shadow of someone under the door. I knew it was her. Then the woman walked. I saw her pass by the windows and disappear into nothing, as if she were smoke. I was so shocked that I remained motionless for minutes. It was the first time I had seen a ghost, and believe me, it doesn't feel good at all. I stayed locked up until dawn when it was my time to leave. The children and teachers began to arrive. I was very friendly with a teacher there who, upon seeing me, joked about my appearance, saying I looked very worn out that day. I couldn't help but tell him what happened. I said, "No jokes, I'm very scared, and I don't know if I should quit." His face changed from laughter to concern. He replied, "Don't quit, Martine. I've also heard about that woman, but she's already dead. She can't hurt you." He told me it was rumored she was a teacher who taught when the school first opened it in the 1940s. She was known to be a very mean teacher, hitting the children with rulers, always in a bad mood, seeming to be a teacher only to take advantage of her position, as it was then allowed for teachers to physically assault children if they misbehaved or didn't do their homework, and she seemed to enjoy it. Until one day, a group of teenagers decided to play a cruel joke on the teacher to get revenge for all she did to them in that very classroom, the last one upstairs. They waited behind the door with a small snake one of them had caught near their home by the mountains, intending to throw it at her as she entered. When the snake fell on the teacher, she was so startled that she backed away quickly and fell over the railing, dying instantly as she fell headfirst. He also told me that school staff who had the misfortune of seeing her would quit immediately, janitors, watchmen, and even teachers, but he convinced me not to do it. I listened to him and didn't quit, besides needing the job very much, and fortunately the following nights were calm. Occasionally, I would hear the same noises in that classroom but never saw her again. You never get used to those things, yet I lasted many years at that school as a watchman. I hope you liked my story. See you next time.